one.
How are the logistics working for you guys?
Well, so they had us, my office did mandated, or my company, I should say, did mandated remote work starting Friday, which,
Starting Friday. Okay, so we're a couple days ahead of it.
yeah. So we were, in that sense, I guess, ahead of the curve. And then, everything started trickling down from there as far as daycare closed on Monday and then mandated closure on whatever it was yesterday in Massachusetts. So we've been basically homebound since, Friday. And the logistics, we're set up to work from home as far as like this. We use Teams on the corporate side, and I'm pretty fluent in it as far as screen sharing and video and whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just the logistics of having two people, because Kimberly works at the same company, two people with full-time jobs and no daycare, so a 3-year-old running around all day.
Right.
And we're basically juggling two full-time work schedules, air quotes full-time, because everybody's in a spot right now where, productivity is out the window.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I've noticed, or at least this is my hypothesis, in the last couple of days. So, like you, I work exclusively from home, so there's really no change
no
from that
change. You're pretty
perspective
comfortable with that, yeah.
for me. But I've noticed, like, external meetings, like there's been a huge uptick in the number of external meetings I've had, just because I think people don't know how to like handle themselves when they're working from home. So it's just like they feel like they need to like book meetings all the time. It's like, no, that's not how this works at all. You do the same thing you would normally do. You just do it from home,
Right. What do you mean external meetings? Or people are booking them
Like
with
with customers and prospects and stuff.
Gotcha. So this is curious,
So
but given that we got this working, this is actually pretty cool. You and I could sling this anytime we want.
yeah, no kidding.
I don't, like I said, I'm on my work laptop now, because it seems like the only time I can get anything done is maybe a couple of hours in the morning, a couple hours in the afternoon if I'm lucky, and then like the 8 to 10 block at night. I'm wondering how in the hell I'm gonna, like everybody else, balance personal time and all that kind of stuff. But hey, there's larger issues at play. So, okay, see your screen here. What application are you using to visualize the data here?
So this is a viz that Johns Hopkins University put together.
Yeah, so I saw a push notification about this, that they're making some cleaned, or I got it through Tableau.
Okay.
Or the notification from Tableau that they were making a data feed available from Johns Hopkins that has cleaned data in semi-real time. So that's what this is?
That is correct from the Johns Hopkins website. I've been leveraging this or looking at it for weeks now. This has been the best, most consistent data source with a decent visualization that I could find that's updated, probably closest to real time. Even WHO is way behind what these guys have. So
Okay.
yeah, if you've got something better, you find that there's a better data feed or something, forward that on to me. I'd like to.
No, I think it's literally the same data feed, just made, or the notice. My company and I have a Tableau visualization software. That's both visualization software, very similar. It looks like very similar to this, as well as data extracts and data partners.
Gotcha.
They basically just said, hey, hope everybody's doing well. And by the way, we're making this complimentary.
I gotcha.
We're making this data feed available, or I shouldn't even say that. They basically advertised that they were taking the Johns Hopkins feed, applying some basic data cleaning to it.
Gotcha.
Putting some sort of, what do you call it, default or stock visuals together that
Visuals
people,
on top of it. Yeah.
yeah, that people could easily access for free. So it's the same data set. It might just be slightly cleaned as far as weeding out some of the data noise or something like that. If you found any of that.
Yeah, well, I've found the thing that gets me about this one that irritates me is just this box down here. So I feel like,
Yeah, yeah.
and I can't. This is all. There's no way to filter this for deaths because I'd like to see like the trend in deaths, but I can't do that. This is all cumulative cases, and it's the only one that doesn't filter. So like globally. So I guess before I start clicking around in here. Yesterday, this number was 215,000 or just shy of 215,000. And total
Okay.
number of deaths globally was 8,732. So we've gone up over 1,000 deaths today, and what's that? 30,000 cases
Yeah.
confirmed globally. Um, But what I was saying here, the filters apply through, which is good on deaths and recovered, because that's interesting. But down here, it doesn't. So I can't get that trend of cases or deaths broken down on a filtered country by country level, which is the one thing that I would like to see. But now maybe I have
think
an answer
that's
for that.
you think that's soft data, or that the way that the way the dashboard is set up just doesn't allow the filter to cascade
I
from
think
one
it's
to
just the
the other.
dashboard.
Okay, okay.
Probably don't want to scare people. I don't. I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
Uh,
they want to
so yeah,
scare the
I guess.
people.
So tell me a little bit about sort of your like when did this become real for you, and kind of like when did you start following this, and kind of your journey and with COVID and coronavirus.
Oh, what are you going to try and sell me on something here?
No, no,
I
no.
don't know. I've been aware of it on the periphery for several weeks. Sort of paying attention to it, and then I don't know. It was maybe the antennas were going up, and then you called me out of the not out of the blue per se, but you called me whenever that was last week,
Yeah.
and we're kind of pushing what I had heard from a couple of what I would have otherwise called fringe sources. Not fringe in the sense that they were suspect, but fringe in the sense that they were outliers,
Yeah.
rather than the majority. Um, and you start to see some stories trickle in, start to see some non-mainstream or very specialized news sources pushing information, and then just coincidentally, this is where things kind of coalesced. I shouldn't say that, but just an odd sort of coincidence is that I've been involved with internally in my company with a project to better basically re-engineer some processes to better support a head of print publication model.
Okay.
And I won't go in great detail, but basically they're pre-published papers, articles that are put out sort of, I wouldn't even say prematurely, but they haven't gone through the full vetting process. And usually that's relatively rare. In the last few years, it's been increasing, moderately, but it's heavily concentrated in the medical space. So
Okay.
you could easily envision sort of an initial web publication of a thesis or what do you want to call it? Control test or experiment, gathers some peer feedback, and then it's revised, and then it's published in the edition, of
Okay.
the latest edition of Science, or the latest edition of Nature, or the latest edition of the British Medical Journal, or something like that. And in the last several months, that's skyrocketed with people, or let me rephrase that. proportion of a head of print material has increased aggressively, and primarily it's been around this topic. Basically, people just trying to get information out there and not willing to go through what is otherwise a fairly protracted peer review editing
process.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, you're lucky if you get something published 18 months after you put it out there. There's just an inherent time delay in that model, And so you're seeing a wealth of a head of print material just pushing the information, trying to push the information, more aggressively than it has in the past. So that started kind of ticking some boxes and perked my ears up.
So you could actually see the topic, and it was just, hey, there's a disease and there's something, and it was just, they actually came across you, and you could read the articles. Like, did you read any of the content, or?
I skimmed. I mean, I didn't read it in depth. I was more looking at it in the aggregate sense, like this, where you're not getting into the nuts and bolts of it, but you're reading, title of this, a head of print record,
topics or
confluence of risk factors for this disease. Next paper is preferred medical treatment for this disease. Things like that start aggressively climbing. And that's what kind of
that's everything. Fascinating.
That's when you start seeing coincidences from multiple different channels start to line up, then you start saying, "What the hell's going on?"
You start asking questions,
or at least saying this is no longer it's not by happenstance. There's something singular causing this type of behavior.
Yeah.
And then what kind of brought it home? I don't recall if it was before or after I talked to you, but occasionally, I don't always do this, but I listen to the Joe Rogan podcast.
Okay.
And, I don't know if you've listened to it, but say what you will about him.
Still no Kirk Minahan though, huh?
Which didn't I hear he went off the air or something like that, or he canceled, or he suspended?
No, he took a mental health break. He was suicidal again, so he went off for a little while, and he just came back on this Monday. So he took a couple of weeks off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, either way, it was within a couple of days of talking to you that Rogan posted a podcast with I forget the guy's name. I could pull it up, but a virologist or somebody specialized in this practice who was and it was a 2-hour conversation of basically cut the bullshit, break it down for me. What are we actually talking about? And that got very detailed and very sort of clear-eyed, without any of the bullshit, and started throwing some numbers around, and that's where you start to say even a conservative estimate is wildly off the charts.
Yeah, it's crazy.
To put it loosely, like even if you round down and you take the lowest possible estimates and a bunch of different variables, you still end up off the map.
No, it's unbelievable. It's unfathomable. I mean, we're going to get into a little bit later. There's some news that came out today that I think is going to point in that direction. But I mean, I think this too. So this is a visualization that EV Defender on Twitter puts out daily.
Okay.
And he kind of does a breakdown. He's been super proactive back from I'd say starting mid to early January. He was just on top of it. And what he was actually able to do was he broke down the number of cases that China was reporting on a daily basis, and he found the model that predicted the next day's reported cases and deaths, like down to within tens, to within like a tenth of a percent. Okay. So his hypothesis was, hey, you're being lied to when an extremely complex scenario arises and you can predict the next day's numbers this closely. Like they're obviously using a model. So I just jumped on him and started following him or her for a while. And obviously gears have shifted. And now China is saying, I should probably bring it up, that today's the first day they've announced 0 new cases from internal community transmission. Any new cases that were reported today have been imported. So that's, and I'll put that in sort of air quotes. There's no new reported cases in China.
Right. Yeah, you're getting into semantics there.
Exactly. So anyways, long story short, now he's more doing the analysis USA versus Italy. And it's interesting because sort of before I had called you, I had been watching I watched what was going on in China, and then I watched what was going on in Italy, and then like I saw exactly the same thing starting in the US, and it hit me as so, and I was like totally flipped out when I called you. I was like, oh my God, like this is it, like it's happening. And what really scared me was a complete lack of government anything, like no testing, no, they were acting like we were still in mitigation, but we were clearly in containment. Like there was a hot spot in Seattle, there was one in New York, there was one in LA, and we're acting like we're trying to trace this thing down and contain it. And it's like, guys, we're beyond that. And then the testing stuff kind of broke. So it just is like a perfect, just the worst possible case scenario as far as I'm concerned. So
missing the mark at every opportunity. Yeah,
every single thing they could do, they did wrong. So this I've found interesting, and this kind of follows what I've expected. So this is the U.S. in red and Italy in black, and the U.S. is set 10 days behind Italy. And my hypothesis going back a few days was that you'd start to see the United States go screaming up faster than Italy. For 2 reasons. Number one, lack of early testing. Number 2, all of the mistakes. And number 3, Italy had a hot spot really in one area in Milan, whereas, like I just said, we had hot spots in Seattle or Washington, LA, and New York. So it's clear that it was going to be worse than what was going on in Italy. And it looks like today's really the first day that we're really surpassing them in total number of cases and getting a lot steeper. So I think there's a little bit of a conversation there too about some additional testing coming on. I don't have like the total test numbers. I'd be curious to see that, how many were tested at Italy through this stage versus the United States. That might put this into a slightly different light.
Whole conversation about sort of net new cases versus just executed tests that identify existing cases. And, again, you're getting into semantics, whether you tested and identified 11,000 cases or the percentage of the total, it gets a little soft here, but ultimately it is what's being reported as far as confirmed cases, Yeah. I mean, you could argue that none of this is a perfect scientific exercise where you've tested 100% of the population and you have 100% accurate and pure data as far as positive and negative test results go.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, especially with, the reporting being, and I'm somewhat skeptical to this too, in some reports, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes too. The reporting is that, especially in the younger demographics, you can be basically asymptomatic throughout or have only minor symptoms. So a lot of those folks wouldn't have been tested. And I've read a little bit that Italy has only tested people who are showing extreme symptoms. I don't feel educated enough to definitively draw that conclusion, but that's kind of what I've heard. Other scary thing here is you see the case fatality rate has been growing. But again, that's a little bit of a data cleanliness issue. And there's a number of variables there that we don't know all the answers to, but it's grown in the last, I'd say, 3 days from about, I'm trying to think back, 3.89 or so up to now 4.2. Yesterday it was just over 4. So we're seeing that increase as well, which is concerning.
Yeah, that's curious, but you almost wonder if that's a factor of that percentage is going to go up because, to a certain extent, because the U.S. hasn't deployed that testing capacity. So in theory, as soon as we start to blow out that testing in theory, again, you would expect that percentage starts dropping down.
So, everybody I've talked to about this says the same thing on that number, and I 100% agree. I think that
that's just
the
math, how the math works. That's not how reality works, right?
But the flip side of that, and we've kind of laughed about the underreporting in China, and I'll throw out the underreporting in Iran as well.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious, just proportionally, yes, for sure, the total number of cases is higher than this reported number, but I'd pretty much guarantee you that the total number of fatalities is significantly higher too. So there's just a lot of unknown, and we're not going to have good answers until, unfortunately, this thing's played a pretty hefty toll, I think. So did you hear about Marcus Smart today?
No, did he get diagnosed?
Yep. So he came out, he posted on Twitter a little video that said he got diagnosed. He was tested, and here's a scary one. I'm looking at the tweet right now. He says, I was tested 5 days ago, and the results came back tonight, which were positive. I've been self-quarantined since the test. Thank goodness. COVID-19 must be taken with the highest of seriousness. I know it's a number one priority for our nation's health experts, and we must get more testing ASAP. In his video, he goes on to talk about he's basically asymptomatic, and it's just his well wishes, just general positivity, and saying that he's been quarantined. 5 days though to get test results back on this thing. How discouraging is that?
Yeah, and he had the wherewithal to sort of self quarantine while waiting.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the only reason he got tested probably was because they played, who was it, the first NBA player from the Jazz. So the Celtics had played the Jazz about a week before.
Right.
He was diagnosed or positive, or his test results came back positive. And then I initially heard a report that all the Celtics had been tested and no positive results were reported. Well, this explains that, because they hadn't had the test results back at that point.
They had no results.
So that's what we're dealing with right now. And this is the kind of stuff that I think, this is kind of why I wanted to do these recordings on a daily basis. Like, I don't know, I have no delusions that anybody's going to necessarily sit down and just be entertained by me talking to my buddies or people that I know or whatever. But I think it's sort of important to capture like this craziness and how weird this is, and sort of how our personal involvement with it, drags out and turns out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we can agree that, at least at this point in time, the experience is pretty widely varied, but it may not stay that way.
Yeah. So, what's your what would you say your level of concern is? My read on you is you think it's going to be at least somewhat catastrophic. Like, what would you like? Throw something out there. What's your
So, trying to think of how to phrase this. So let's consider from the medical perspective, and then we'll talk about everything else. From the medical perspective, the dynamic and the numbers and the sheer math of it all that points at some significant numbers at a bare minimum is concerning. I think what we talked about a little bit earlier about sort of the inertia factor that had to be overcome, we're already behind the eight ball, so we're not even well positioned from a medical prevention perspective when you talk about vaccines and treatment, even just treatment. I think that's one of the more alarming parts of it is, forget about vaccine. We have compromised ability to even treat the worst cases, or even the symptomatic cases. So that's a significant concern. And it sounds like, again, just that inertia factor, just getting to a point that we can treat effectively is a little further off than I think anybody's comfortable with. So we consider that, you're talking about, I'm fairly conscious of the word I'm going to use, but devastation in some areas. It's probably not going to be equally widespread. There's definitely some more susceptible or vulnerable populations in terms of socioeconomic situations, physical situations, exposure, activities, things of that nature than there are in other areas or other circumstances. Think about homeless population. You think about folks that, I've got friends that work in hospitals and their risk factor is exponential compared to like myself, who can work from home, and I just stocked up on groceries and such. We could literally not step out of the house for a while.
Right.
I don't know how long that's going to last, but that's a very different situation. So I shouldn't say a little, but that's a very sobering sort of simple math problem that is enough to leave you, if you're not strongly concerned after that, that's a indictment of your humanity. But so
I tend to agree.
Let's just, pause there. That's simply sort of the human health treatment condition element of it all. Now let's consider the rest of the equation, which is you've literally seen global society, if not shut down, come pretty damn close to it in a week?
Yep.
Maybe
not even
more than, maybe more than that, maybe less than that, depending on where you're at. But probably if you went over to the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and just pulled the top, 5, 10 major indices, all of them have taken exponential hits that haven't been seen, percentage-wise, probably haven't been seen since Christ's Great Depression, maybe even at least World War II, maybe Great Depression, in terms of just shutting off activity in any economic input-output. And that's not something that you bounce back from in 30 days, Let's say we solve this tomorrow. You do not bounce back from that in 30 days. Probably not even 60 days, 90 days. You're probably talking years of digging out. If you think of the Great Recession of the 2000s, we barely have dug out of that, or we had barely dug out of that in recent years, right? And even that, you could argue whether that was a true sort of economic boom or if it was hollow in some areas. But just the dollars that we've taken off the table, the workforce that we've taken off the table, the industries that have shuttered, closed, and the impact that has not just on workforce and salaries and productivity, but supply chain. How long do you think it's going to be until they're talking about, don't worry about your grocery stores. How long do you think it's going to be until some of those peripheral supply chains start getting choked off? I've already heard anecdotally, I don't know if this is true, but something like 80% of the world's acetaminophen and ibuprofen comes from a similar area in China.
And prescription drugs.
Yeah. So what do you think is going to happen when China has, shut down that economy or that industry weeks ago, and probably won't have it back up and running to anything, even a shadow of full capacity for I don't know how long? What do you think is going to happen when medications start running out? And folks are, so I guess that's what I don't know if I would say more concerned with, but that sort of long tail impact. Let's just say miracle situation. We solved the medical, that directly affected folks. Let's just call it, in the near term, in the next week, the next 30 days, or whatever it might be, and we have a viable solution. We have enough equipment. There's still going to be a massive long tail of economic impact, socioeconomic impact that is going to take years, if we ever rebuild out of that.
Yeah.
I think this is probably highlighted the elephant in the room that nobody ever really wanted to engage, which is that the healthcare industry is a fucking mess. From a number of different perspectives, not even talking about the efficacy of healthcare itself, but just the bureaucracy of it all, the sort of interbreeded industrial interests, the concentrated. Here's another one for you. So throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s, industry focused on maximizing dollar in their supply chain, and where could they find their most cost-effective supply chains by moving production to certain areas of the world. I think at a much lower cost, but with admittedly in some scenarios, they took a hit in some other areas, whether it was PR, whether it was union battles, whether it was loss of Made in America label on their product, whatever it was. I think you're probably going to see eventually, when this starts building back up, industry takes diversification of their supply chain into better account, so that they can't be taken out with a single, or let me rephrase that, their supply chain is not concentrated in such a way that a single factor like this can put it all at risk. Or let's say Suez Canal, somebody takes hostage the Suez Canal and doesn't let any oil through.
Right.
What is that? And it just highlights these bottlenecks, that it doesn't matter how robust your industry is, if some key supply chains or key industries hinge on a single fail point. And however outside of the realm of possibilities it happens in 0.0001% of the time, it does mean that it inevitably happens, and you have to be prepared for that scenario, which is interesting. I've heard some economic models that kind of play with that sort of once in 1,000 years scenario. And most economic models acknowledge it, but say that it's such a rare phenomenon we don't need to account for it in our modeling, because it's outside of our control, and it might happen once in 100 years. Whereas prevalent now seems very front of mind. There's a competing school of thought in economic modeling that hasn't gotten much traction to date, but it actually justifies the opposite, which is, if it happens once in 100 years, build it into your economic model as an inevitable, and it will make the cost of these activities clearer over time,
right,
because you are definitively accounting for something like this catastrophe to happen, even though it may not happen this year, the next year, the year after that. It will happen. It's inevitable at some point. And so to pretend that it's not is just creating a false sense of security.
Well, the last time it happened was about 100 years ago on the dot. So
yeah, which I've heard is also 100 years before that, 1818 and 1718. Yeah. You start going 17, 16, 1500s. That's when you get into the plagues in Europe. It seems like a humanitarian, maybe that's not the right word, but a cycle in human sort of immunological evolution, that every 100 years we get smacked with something like this.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson, I don't know your thoughts on him, but he had a good article yesterday that was fairly similar.
I think it may just be his haircut, but he looks like a prep school prick that I want to punch in the face.
I used to hate him. I couldn't stand him. All of a sudden, he's growing on me here in the last, I'd say, 6 months or so. But regardless, he made some points yesterday, and there's been, a lot of commentary, and I don't really want to get into it right now, but with, the political leaders on the right intentionally calling it the China flu and the Wuhan flu, or whatever the case may be. And he kind of came out, and his statement ultimately was, hey, let's not forget that is where this originated. And the government did know about it, and they hid it. And when we do, and we will recover from this, we need to keep that in mind, that's not somebody that we can trust. And we have to reconsider, frankly, how our economic engine and all of that, exactly to your point, is built, right? We can't be outsourcing critical, life dependent pharmaceutical drugs to a country that you can't completely trust. You have to have at least some of that capability here on shore.
Right. It's
So
basically it's basic hedging strategy, right? So
exactly, yeah.
If we don't have confidence in their alignment, or frankly, even if we did, let's say we had the same sort of setup with the Netherlands or even Switzerland for that matter. What's to say Switzerland doesn't get smacked with a Category 8 earthquake?
Right.
Do not concentrate key national what do you call it? National security apparatus in that degree to diversify. You start building factories in northern Canada or something like that. Subsidize the activity so that you are purposefully spreading the risk around.
I think you're exactly right. Yep. And I think that'll certainly come into play as we roll out of this. So cool. So next thing I like to do is cover just a little bit of the news. So I think, and I didn't pull up any articles of this, but before we get into this story, I did hear a little bit of positive news in that they're seeing some positive results, or speculatively positive results and I couldn't explain it to you, but by any means, but by leveraging blood cultures from recovered patients, they're able to, I don't know what it is they do with it, but I guess it provides some sort of treatment.
It's a similar concept behind a vaccine, where a vaccine, you inject the patient with the dead virus and their body learns from it and basically prepares for the live virus.
Mm-hmm.
If you take a patient that had the virus, take their blood, centrifuge it, filter it, you can actually extract the antibodies that are pre-staged to fight the virus and then insert those into another patient. So you're basically giving them the weapon, but I don't know enough about it to know the pros and cons and whether that's even a scalable approach. But I would say right off the bat, the Achilles heel of it all is that it's dependent on existing patients.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a whole number of reasons why a simple blood transfusion from patient A to patient B is not a viable approach. not the least of which is, virus infections and stuff like that. You're talking about blood type compatibility. You're talking about rejection. You're talking about other factors in the blood, things like that could cause complications. So it seems like I don't know enough about it to speak much further than that, but it seems like promising. But
it's something, and these days it's a glimmer of positivity, and you gotta grasp onto it, I guess.
Sure.
So there was that, and then there were some anti-malarial meds. Trump brought those up in his update today, that they were streamlining an approval process and it didn't. I only caught the tail end of it. It sounds like they're not confident that it'll be a great treatment, but they are confident that it won't have negative side effects. So they're going to try it, and they think it might work. So there's another thing that, at least we're seeing some sort of progress in treatment, and who knows?
Something.
Hopefully that works.
It's something. I appreciate that it's something. That's good news, but the
still a long way away.
Well, yeah, and what I hate to go down this road, but I'm acutely sensitive to the notion of paying Peter, or how's the idiom go? Borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and some of these, specifically, I'm curious whether the likelihood of us rushing something to market without fully understanding what we're putting out there, and that it may have, assuming it will not have negative implications on the scale of the current situation, it might be an improvement, but the unanticipated negative implications of something that we rush, through testing or approval or whatever it is. There's a reason all those approval stages are set up. There's probably not a good reason why they take so effing long to complete.
Right.
But there's a reason why when you start inoculating millions of people, I want to say it was polio. I don't think it was polio, but no, maybe it was polio. I think there was a polio vaccine, but something like 10% of the inoculated had a severe reaction to the vaccine that actually caused symptoms worse than the polio virus itself.
Beautiful.
So granted, on balance, that still might be an improvement, but let's be careful of releasing Satan to fight the devil here,
Yeah.
because
Well put.
one might be better in the short term, one might be better in the long. I'm just sensitive to how many corners we cut for this. Not saying we shouldn't do it, but let's document our tracks and make sure that
Be
if
smart
something
about it.
going south, we have a ripcord to pull or an exit strategy rather than just saying, oh shit, you mean after we just inoculated 50 million people, we find out there's something wrong with it?
No, they're all gonna drop dead. Yeah.
Or have birth defects, or we just inadvertently sterilized 50 million people. Whoops.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what seemed good news yesterday was, I don't know whether it was Trump made the announcement or who initially did, but there's a hospital ship pictured here, the USS or USNS Comfort hospital ship that got approval to head to New York. That came out yesterday, and today we got reports that it's going to take weeks for this thing to get up and to be in a status where it's ready to go to New York. So what seemed positive yesterday seems not so positive here today. Maybe that was just a rush to, seemed like good news, and hey, the help's on the way. We got some new hospital beds coming to New York, and all of a sudden, oh wait, yeah, it's been approved, but it's not viable because it's not something that you can just flip the switch on. A facility like this, there's some ramp up time and requirements that go into it. So I think I read somewhere it could be 6 to 8 weeks before this thing gets to New York, which is and the speed this thing is going, that's forever from now.
6 to 8 weeks, we could probably build 3 of them in New York.
There's nothing else in New Jersey, right, or Western Connecticut. Just throw them out there. So
So I'll point out the obvious. The flaw is the messenger here. It's great to throw out things to raise people's hopes, but what people need at this point are definitive deliverables on a finite timetable. Meaning, if you say it's going to be there Wednesday, make sure it's there Wednesday, and at least a shadow of what you promised. Don't promise, this will, this, that, the other thing, it'll happen, and then either it never shows up or the reality is different than what's promised. That starts eroding public confidence real quick.
That's a good point too, and it's, especially in our situation, it comes from multiple angles, right? So you get sort of that the presidential angle, and you don't know, and his response is, I feel like it's gotten a hell of a lot better than it was initially when he was just shrugging the thing off.
Yeah.
So it has improved, but then you also have
reframe that. Let's reframe that. It's improved by acknowledging the situation.
I'm sorry, say that again.
The message has improved by simply acknowledging the reality.
Yeah, yes, and I would say has taken proactive steps faster than even some European counterparts. I think he's taken some positive first steps. I mean, when he shut down travel to the EU, EU leaders screamed and cried about it, and then 2 days later they were like, you know what? That's actually a pretty good idea. We're going to do it.
Yeah, I just want to be cautious about giving credit for, saying the sky is blue. It's like, wait a minute, don't you get docked points for saying it wasn't blue in the first place?
Totally agree, but at least it's on the appropriate. It's back to pointed in the right general direction. So sure. That's it's something. But then the other clip of that is sort of the media response and how we consume this. And I could say, for one, I've consumed as much as I possibly can as quickly as I can, and I just have an insatiable appetite for this. And probably to my own detriment, right? And you start to see things like that, and it's like the media just wants to get it out there. And he said, hey, we're going to send this ship to New York. And then
Right.
the immediate press release is, oh, ship is coming to New York. And then it's like, well, no, it is technically, it's just going to take a little while.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to appreciate the context of the message. If you're delivering anything from the presidential podium,
you need to be clear about that. Yeah.
well, you should reasonably expect that within a matter of, even minutes in some cases, everybody, it's disseminated widely to the American people.
Yep.
You're not having a conversation.
Oh, you still there? I think I might have lost you.
Yeah, you get me?
Yeah, I got you back.
Yeah, it was just, my point was about appreciating the context in which you deliver the message. If I call you up and say something to you, or I stand on the street corner and shout something, that's very different than saying the exact same thing at a presidential podium.
Absolutely. So this will be an interesting transition, I think. And I don't know how deep we want to go in this, but so there's a lot of fallout in the last couple of days about spring breakers and the kids that were out there being irresponsible, millennials, and I saw somebody tweeted out they were calling the coronavirus the boomer remover, which if you know the okay boomer sort of thing, I thought was pretty funny. But
that's witty. I'll get one.
That's a good one. Of course, there's a big hullabaloo about spring breakers, and a bunch of videos came out of people down in Florida going crazy and completely ignoring any sort of social distancing requests or requirement. Bars were open, people standing shoulder. Well, the next day, today, there were a number of articles. This one's from Bloomberg that says, young people are indeed falling ill from COVID-19. And nice little visualization here. It shows the number of hospitalized, somewhat in line. I mean, yes, it's lower, but, still substantial. Although this data I somewhat question because of this little asterisk here: illness, outcome or death missing or unknown for 2001 cases, which is a lot of cases. But
2,000 out of how many?
Out of 7,000. What do we say total cases right now?
Jesus. So just from a basic data analytics perspective, you got to acknowledge when 20% of your test population doesn't have enough or doesn't have sufficient data.
Yeah.
Meaning that, and this is where, coming from the corporate world, I throw this chart at somebody, at an executive, about let's call it a strategic acquisition or some other situation, dollars and products that map to this sort of scenario, and I say, oh, by the way, 20% of the data doesn't map properly, they're going to throw me out.
Exactly. It's only 20%. Come on.
Yeah. No, that's not going to really change the difference. What are you talking about?
I mean, it totally fucks up my narrative. I mean, I can't have it in there.
Right. No, I already decided on the narrative. We'll just throw that out and pretend it didn't happen.
So yeah, just a reminder to keep skeptical. But what I thought was interesting about this, and this is where I'm gonna I don't know if you've heard this, so I'm gonna throw it out there and get your reaction. I don't really want to dive into it deep right now. So I was talking to a coworker today, and he told me, past the news. He said, look behind the news. Don't look at it. Look past it. Look at what else is going on in the world right now. And then he brought up a number of interesting events that have happened in the last few days that he was right, I hadn't heard about. So one of those, there were 300 plus Saudi Arabian government officials that have been arrested for corruption in the last week or so. There's been dozens and dozens.
What's his name? Mohammed bin Saladin is cleaning house over there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and nobody's hearing about it, right? So it's somewhat interesting. There's
Well,
been
so well, we can keep going on this, but to counter, the dude effing had somebody assassinated in quote unquote broad daylight, and still, I won't say nobody cared, but nothing was done about it. So, I mean,
yeah,
that could have been slapped on the front page of every newspaper, and nothing would have happened.
I agree with you. Yeah, and I don't know what to make of his theory, frankly, because none of the pieces add up. I'm gonna look at them a little deeper just because I do trust this person's judgment, but I don't see the connection, and all of them can be disproved fairly quickly. So there's the Saudi Arabian government officials that have been arrested. There's been, I think, 600 or something cartel, uh, drug cartel people arrested, and I'm not sure whether that's in the United States or in Mexico, but there's been a huge
Yeah,
cartel
I saw
breakdown.
that. I want to say that's actually in the U.S., but I might be wrong on that.
I thought it was in the U.S. and the other one, and this one's pretty easy to shrug at, but when you start to think a little deeper, it might be a little harder. There's been a tremendous number of CEO and corporate board level people who have stepped down voluntarily in the last 3 or 4 months. And those include, of course, if you look at people in retail in the last month, it's pretty easy to say, I see a big issue coming. I'm going to step down. But when you start looking back even further than that, it is kind of weird how many have stepped down. And this includes all over the place, from Silicon Valley to manufacturing to, the CEO at Disney recently stepped down. Really
Yeah.
just all over the place. So I'd
So
be curious.
what's the supposition there that they're just running for the hills or trying to get out of the crosshairs?
Well, his theory is that this is all a distraction and that it's to cloud the news, that this is all the flu and that there's something going on behind the scenes and these governments are working in cahoots. They're shutting things down and they're kind of like a reverse New World Order, and they're cleaning house and getting rid of all these people and all this sort of stuff. I'm going to table that. I don't want to get too deep into that. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think it's out there. Um,
So I'm going to just go out on a limb and say I've observed enough. Um, how should I say this? Smart dudes that try to put together a tightly coordinated operation in very local scenarios, in maybe in cross state, cross country, international scenarios.
yeah,
They all end up going pear shaped or foobarred in one way or another. And
totally.
just the notion that such a feat could be coordinated and is not susceptible to the sheer idiocy of the human race is almost an asinine idea.
It's immediately disqualified.
I mean,
I'm with you.
I'm not. I'm being. I'm making light of it to make a point. Yeah, it's entirely possible, but you look at some of these industries that have a clear mandate to execute a responsibility, and they can't even do that, let alone sort of collaboratives that take into account a very short list of variables. Yeah.
Yeah. Global manipulation of all media
Yeah.
sources.
I mean, last week the trash truck didn't even pick up my trash. They drove by, they picked up everybody else's trash. They didn't pick up my trash. You're trying to tell me that we have the capacity to pull off a global conspiracy collectively?
Well, that's because Donald Trump will tell you it's because he doesn't run the trash company, man.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Granted, it would be bankrupt and they wouldn't have any trash truck.
So I think we could put that one bed for now. But I did want to get it on here because I do think it's interesting that that's how some people perceive it, and that's kind of what we're fighting against, right? So he's probably not taking things seriously in terms of any sort of proactive social distancing or anything like that. So last piece here that I'll touch on, then I'll let you go. My wife's probably getting antsy with me anyways.
Yeah, I can't imagine why. You must be a party to live with.
She loves it. She loves hearing the updates, hourly update. So have you seen this one?
I don't know if I saw the specific numbers, but I heard something about he was talking about,
Yep.
a stupid percentage of Californians would be infected.
So it came out just a couple hours ago. Governor Newsom in California said 56% of Californians are expected to be infected with COVID-19. The math on that comes up to roughly 25.5 million people with COVID-19. Now, the numbers out of Italy, the initial warning from Italy when they really started to handle the breakout over there was to expect approximately 10% or more than 10% of the people who are diagnosed with COVID to ultimately end up needing hospitalization. And I believe the number was 5% needing ICU care. Been following to sort of see that trend because I've had pretty good access to it. In Massachusetts today, there have been 328 positive cases. Of those, 43 have been hospitalized, required hospitalization. So that amounts to 13% of cases have required hospitalization. Granted, it's a fairly small data set, but I'd say it generally aligns with what we heard from Italy. Now, if you project that out to the 25.5 million of infected Californians, you're talking at 2.5 or more million people requiring hospitalization. And the expectation is this is within the next 8 weeks. So I believe it takes, there's about a 1 week up to a 2 week incubation period. So really you're talking the next 3 months. You're talking about 2.5 million people require hospitalization. Holy shit.
Yeah, this is not staggered over several weeks or months. This is pretty much a spike, to everything we've been talking about, happening concurrently. Which is a concern. And I'll just highlight, I think some of the estimates that I had originally seen, 56% is actually pretty low compared to, I think, that may be specific to California, but I thought I had heard a general estimate of 70 to 80%.
Yeah, I've seen estimates up there. I know Angela Merkel said 70% in Germany, and I've seen 70% thrown around here too.
Maybe
nobody wants to hold on to that. Right? Nobody wants to own that number, I think, is the reality. So I think they've kind of backed off of some of those projections just because they don't want to be responsible for everything that'll go along with it, right?
Yeah, right. So that's a little alarming, to say the least.
That's extremely alarming. I mean, so you think 2.5 million people in the next 3 months require hospitalization, and even so, let's say, I mean, the World Health Organization has said death rate on this thing is approximately 3.2%. They were initially at the high 2s, 2 and change, and then they adjusted it up to 3.2. I haven't seen data or a change in that for over a week. Maybe it has changed, and I'm just not aware of it. But if that 3.2% fatality rate, you're looking at 816,000 dead in California alone.
Yeah, that's a sobering figure. That's freaking scary.
And then, we talked about the 3 hot spots and how the United States did such a shitty job at containing this thing. It's not going to be any better in my estimation in New York, which has even a bigger population than the city, I guess. Well, California has a bigger population as a state, but the city of New York, that's going to be an ugly scene.
Yeah, that's what kind of that's what's concerning, is about population density, but it's about infrastructure too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, California, regionally, New York have some of the densest populations, but they also have, varied infrastructure as far as capabilities, hospital capacity, what have you. That's, yeah. So, yeah, where do you go from here?
Exactly. Yeah, it's scary, and I'm, personally, I mean, I'll tell you, I've stocked up, and I'm doing the best. My family and I are doing the best that we can. Of course, we've moved to homeschooling. All the schools have closed in New Hampshire, and we've got 2 weeks roughly of food and general supplies and things like that. And you do concern about, or I do have concern about, how quickly, and you voiced some concerns about this too, how quickly it's the infrastructure going to come back, and transportation and farming, and are there going to be issues there, and just getting things on the shelves, and how does it hit where? And, the best thing I think we can do at this point is just stay the hell away from everybody for a little while, hope for the best.
Yeah, so I mean, to that end, right, a lot of people, or I shouldn't say a lot, but a lot of the mandates have been until April 6th, I think.
Yeah.
What's your confidence level or sense that come April 6th, we're going to be talking about
0?
What an improved situation versus it's going to be April 5 and it's going to be entirely clear that this is going to continue or be worse or more constrictive or whatever you want to call it, past April 6th.
I think at our current trajectory, I think there's 0 chance that by April 6th we see any sort of improvement. I think even if everybody's all the social distancing and quarantining measures seriously, it would take even longer than that to see the positive turn in the cases. But we're still going to be dealing with the fallout from this first round, and I think what they're doing is they're working in 3-week or 15-day increments. And they're not, they will reevaluate when they get closer. Italy just extended their national lockdown today. They were supposed to come out from that, I think, in a couple of days. They extended that out in an additional week or so. I think we're going to see more of that here. I don't think my kids are going back to school this year. I don't think there's going to be an MLB season at all this year, unless they decide to play with no fans. I mean, I think this is our reality until, well, I'll say optimistically, there is a chance that weather could affect this, and like the flu, we see a dip in cases, and that would make a difference. I haven't seen that in the data. I think that this affects warm climates badly too. So my outlook's negative.
Yeah, interesting. I don't disagree with you at all. I think you're just reinforcing what are suspicions or what do you want to call it? Inclinations that a lot of folks maybe just they haven't had the kind of hard, cold, realistic conversation with themselves that based on this situation, like you said, at a bare minimum, the math doesn't even work. 2-week incubation period. And we're going to lift or maybe restore something in 2 or 3 weeks. No, if anything, you would probably double that, right? So 2-week incubation period, double that, call it 4 weeks, and then see where we are.
What is this? Breaking news from California. California governor orders all 40 million residents to stay home to limit outbreak.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, my sister's out in LA, so I got to give her a call. They've been doing all right, though. They have a 4-month-old baby, so they haven't been leaving the house anyways. But they have a 4-month-old baby, so that immediately raises, concerns, more so than just your average 20, 30 something running around.
This is another thing we're going to start to see, right? And we talked about this a little bit earlier, having that infrastructure.
Everybody's clamoring for the resources, and what used to be a cooperative partnership may no longer be. Especially, I haven't kept up with India, but where do they sit in terms of sort of number of cases?
Low.
Interesting.
I actually was talking to a coworker whose family was stuck in India, and he's been trying to get them.
Yeah, that's curious. Do you think that's
this little tiny dot?
Yeah. Do you think that's a reporting error, or
Probably
that you just haven't seen the influx yet?
I think it's a bad reporting.
Because my concern there would be that's gonna skyrocket as soon as it hits there with some gusto. We have my company has some resources in Hyderabad. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, so do we. Yeah.
So that's not gonna go well. I mean, you talk about U.S. was caught flat-footed. India,
well,
you hear about some of the other political
density and stuff. Like, holy crap.
Population density, but have you kept track of Trump's stellarly successful 2-day trip to India a couple of weeks ago?
No.
Well, he made a presidential drop in India to shake hands with President or Prime Minister Modi?
Okay.
Who just in the fall, you might have been hearing about protests in India, protests in the street. India, one of the largest by population countries in the world, one of the largest Muslim populations in the world, percentage-wise. I think they're actually only like maybe 20% Muslim. Otherwise, mostly Hindu. Modi added I think it was a law that a citizen can be any religion except Muslim.
Yeah, similar situation in China, right?
Yep. However, you have existing Indian citizens who are Muslim that are going to be stripped of their citizenship as that law is implemented. And so, as President Trump came in, shook hands with them, said, "You're doing a great job. People love you." There were riots in the streets, and the most civilian deaths in demonstrations in something ridiculous like 80 years. Hundreds of people killed in religious rioting. So that was a very successful trip.
Well, I mean, the good news is ISIS has advised against jihad in Europe due to the coronavirus outbreak. You hear about that?
I did not.
That's actually factually true. I mean, they have said no jihad for now.
Yeah, they're looking out for their
back.
Health and safety.
Yep. Safety conscious. All right. Well, I'll let you go. If you want, I'd love to do this again. Maybe when news kind of slows down a little bit and we get more into regular life or new regular life, and kind of talk to you about how you're handling things and how things are going.
Yeah, sure. I think we're all in new territory here as far as how the world's unfolding, and sort of as you just pulled up, breaking news seems like breaking news used to be a rarity. Now every effing story is breaking news, and for good reason. Some of these, oh my God. So
you can't even keep up with it.
No, you can't, and that's just it. You try to, and you're immediately overwhelmed, or you exhaust yourself. That's kind of where I've been, between work, stress with kind of the family, home life, trying to work remote, all that kind of stuff, trying to keep up with what the hell's going on. It's stressful. But yeah, let's do it again in a few days or a few weeks, depending on what unfolds and how.
Sounds good, man. Well, I appreciate it.
sir.
Go call your sister.
Yeah, yeah, I should.
All right,
Fun
take it easy.
stuff. All right, sir.
See you.